Saint Therese of the Child Jesus liked a particular book of conferences to Christian women by a bishop in France in the 1800s, from her lifetime, Bishop Dupanloup. In one particular conference she liked was on the heart of a mother. And she quoted in one of her letters the sentence from Bishop Dupanloup where he says, "I'm not afraid to say that the heart of a mother is God's masterpiece." And I wanted first of all to share a little bit more from that conference from which she quoted. And the bishop says, "I wish to speak to you now on the heart of a mother. I'm not afraid to say the heart of a mother is God's masterpiece. He has put in it an incredible power to love. When God wished us to understand His love for us, He would not find a better means than to compare it to the love of a mother for her child. Can a mother forget her child and have not compassion on the son of her womb? Ah, even if a mother should forget her child, I will not forget thee." It is always a mother's love which is most closely compared and likened to divine love. I will tell you what I have felt many times seeing the solicitude, the care of a young mother for her child. I have often admired this great wonder, for it is really so, this amazing transformation which God works in a soul by the power of maternal love, which changes and overcomes all in the heart of a young mother of 20 years. That independence which you see in your daughters, and of which you sometimes complain, that levity, that need for movement and pleasure, in short, everything which forms the charm and the dangers of youth, all is overcome. Every manner of trouble and every possible burden is accepted by the young mother. She has no other desires, either for pleasure or for society, when her child cries for her. This love of a mother is not only the most tender and strongest of all loves, but it has another unique quality. It is a selfless love, which knows how to suffer, a love of sacrifice. No, there is no creature on earth destined to suffer more than a mother. This is what gives this love its greatness and nobility. The love of a mother from beginning to end is a sacrifice. It is not without sweetness, otherwise our poor nature would succumb, but it is always a sacrifice. And I am glad to say so here in front of your young daughters who need to know it. Any mother who does not understand that sacrifice will be the foundation of her life understands nothing either of the reality of her life or of God's plan for her. So those are just various excerpts from that conference. And I think today on Mother's Day, one of the best things we could do and leave with the mothers in the parish and those who will at some time pursue the vocation of motherhood, follow it, is to come to a great knowledge, a great appreciation of this vocation of a mother. You know, I like to compare the vocation of a mother with the vocation of a priest. Not because they are the same vocation, but because they are both a vocation. And very often, in today's society, the concept of a vocation of a mother as being a vocation has been lost sight of, whereas we have retained the great awe about the vocation of a priest. If a priest were to so forget his dignity as a priest and the higher calling to which God has called him, so as to get himself involved in some other career, we would all be shocked. We would think that man has lost the sight of of the high calling that God has given him, and he's turned to something lower. He has forgotten what he is. But unfortunately, is this true of the motherhood? Do we retain among Catholics this sense of the high calling of a mother, and how it is something to which she dedicates her whole life, that it is the whole purpose of her life, just as a priest dedicates his life from the time he is ordained. The remainder of his life he can never go back. It is always the priesthood, that vocation, that determines everything he does. And so also shouldn't it be for a mother, that being a mother is what she is? And if we ask, have we retained in society, and particularly among Catholics, have we retained this notion of the vocation of a mother? To answer that question, we only have to look and say, well, the devil knows what God's plan is. The devil knows what is good, and he always opposes it. So to know if we are following God's plan, we can look and say, well, what is the devil's plan? What does the devil try to do what does he want mothers to become? And one place we can look for this is in what the communists tried to do to the family, and above all to the mother, to take her away from her vocation of motherhood. It was the communists 100 years ago always used as a plea this idea that the woman was enslaved in the home, that her duties of a mother was something, instead of being of great dignity, that it was something beneath her dignity, to be tied down by children. And so they pushed and pushed for any way they could to remove the mother from the home. This was clear both in their actions, what happened in Russia under communism, and not only that, but it was their explicitly stated goal was to remove the mother from the home. For example, one of the communist leaders, the prominent ones in this country, William Foster, he wrote a book, and the title is Toward Soviet America. And in it he says, "The boasted American home, enslaving the woman through her economic inferiority and her children, makes her dependent on her husband. The proletarian revolution will profoundly change all this. The American Soviet government will immediately set about liquidating the elaborate network of slavery in which woman is enmeshed. She will be freed economically, politically, and socially. The USSR shows the general lines along which the emancipation of woman will also proceed in a Soviet America. In freeing the woman, socialism liquidates the drudgery of housework. So important do communists consider this question that the Communist International deals with it in its world program. In the Soviet Union, the attack upon household slavery is delivered from every possible angle. Great factory kitchens are being set up to prepare hot, well-balanced meals for home consumption by the millions. Communal kitchens in apartment houses are organized widespread. To free the woman from the enslavement of the perpetual care of her children is also a major object of socialism. The free Russian woman is the trailblazer for the toiling woman of the world. She is beating out a path which, ere long, her American sister will begin to follow." And haven't we seen this? Under the plea of helping the mother, the establishment of daycare so that the mother can be free to leave the home and leave the care of her young children to someone else while she goes and pursues a career. All the different things that are done under the plea of lightening the mother's burden, but in reality of removing the burden from her, taking away her vocation. And this is not just something, to show that this is not just something that is just a change in custom in society, but that this is a fundamental error against a deliberate attack on what a mother is. It's interesting to note that those very things that communist leader spoke of, in which we see in our country to a very large degree now, Pope Pius XII himself mentioned those very things in 1945, and one of his most important addresses to women is a very long address in which he lays out very clearly God's plan for woman. And he says in there, speaking of communist countries, he says, a certain totalitarian regime tempts woman with marvelous promises of equality of rights with men, assistance during the period of gestation and labor, communal kitchens, and other public services, relieving her of domestic burdens. Public nurseries and other institutions maintained and administered by the state and local authority, exempting her from her maternal obligations toward her children. Education without fees, public assistance in case of illness. And Pope Pius XII goes on to say that some of these things, they're not bad in themselves, and where there are legitimate efforts to help the mother with her burden. But he says the problem is the intent of these things is to take the burden away from the mother. And by that means to remove her from her vocation and to remove the children from her care. And he goes on to say that the mother's place must be in the home. That he says, restore woman as soon as possible to her place of honor in the home as housewife and mother. This is the universal cry today. It is as though the world had suddenly awakened in alarm and horror to see the results of a material and technical progress of which it had hitherto been so proud. And he goes on to point out the consequences of the mother being out of the home, pursuing some career. And he says, here is the wife who, to augment her husband's income, also goes out to work in a factory, leaving the home neglected during her absence. Already squalid and confined enough, perhaps, the house becomes even more desolate for lack of care. And here are the members of the family working separately at different hours in different parts of the city, and hardly ever meeting one another, not even for the principal meal or for rest at the end of a day's work, much less for family prayers. What remains of family life, and what attractions does it have to offer the children? In addition to these unhappy consequences of the mother's absence from the home, the mother's absence from the home has another and more lamentable result. It affects the children's education, especially the girls' training and preparation for real life. Accustomed to her mother being always absent from home, and to seeing the home itself so dismal in its neglected condition, she will not be able to find anything attractive in it, nor will she feel the slightest inclination for the austerities of housework, any appreciation of its dignity and beauty, or any desire to devote herself to it one day as wife and mother. When we read the teachings of the popes, this is not something that is an option, as a Catholic can say, well, I agree with that, or I disagree with it, or I have my own opinions on it. What the popes have laid out is because that is God's plan. This is what we can and must be doing. And this is the opposite of what society has done today. Society has attempted to break down every distinction of man and woman, to deny that God had a role for each, and that in order to make them capable of fulfilling that role, he gave to each certain qualities. And the qualities of a woman are made for her vocation and not to do what the man does. Pope Pius XII said, "Whether she is married or single, the woman's function is seen clearly defined in the lineaments of her sex, in its propensities and special powers. She works side by side with man, but she works in her own way and according to her natural bent. Now a woman's function, a woman's way, a woman's natural bent is motherhood. Every woman is called to be a mother in the physical sense, or a mother in a sense more spiritual and more exalted yet real nonetheless. To this end the Creator has fashioned the whole of woman's nature, not only her organism, but also, and still more, her spirit, and most of all her exquisite sensibility. This is why it is only from the standpoint of the family that the woman, if she is a true woman, can see and fully understand every problem of human life." Just recently, there was a study that came out where they proved scientifically that in fact physically, even the brain, the development of the brain, is negatively impacted by the absence of the mother from the home during the childhood. And this is because it is not in accordance with God's plan. God intended the mother to be the one that trains the young child, not some daycare facility. When we properly understand the vocation of a mother, it would be every mother's desire to be that one to raise the child. What would we think of a priest who, although he can offer Mass and heal souls, absolve their sins in confession, instead he went to get a 9-to-5 job as a plumber? Yes, that any work, no matter how menial, has a great dignity when it is done in accordance with God's plan, but not when it is sought to abandon a high vocation that God has given someone. And this is why the priest cannot do that. It is not what God called him to. What would we think of a doctor who was a renowned heart doctor who had worked wonders in healing patients, a great surgeon who gave it all up in order to take a desk job somewhere as a secretary? And what would we think when a mother, whom God has called to form the soul of a rational being, a human being who is destined to live forever, who God intends that mother to make a saint, and instead to abandon that soul to the care of someone else in order to follow some career in which she has far less influence on souls? So this is the great evil in society today, is that loss of the sense of when a mother forgets how amazing the vocation is, that what a thing it is that God has put in her care, a thing that requires her whole devotion, just as a priest must devote himself entirely to the souls under his care. Now Pius XII recognizes that he says, unfortunately, society has been purposely led, both through communism, socialism, and through capitalism, he says. Society has been led purposely to destroy the conditions that enable a mother to stay at home and fulfill her vocation. It has been made very difficult for a father of the family to be the breadwinner alone and support the family. He says sometimes there are cases where it's unavoidable, very sadly so, that the mother must go out and work. But always, if we understand what God intended, we never accept an undesirable condition and just resign ourselves to it. We try to correct it when we can, at the earliest time when it's possible to correct it. And Pius XII said, if you mothers must go out and work, he said, then you must remember that the need to work does not excuse from any of the duties that you must perform, that you would otherwise have had to dedicate your whole life to. And he says this places a double and incredible burden on a mother. And he says many mothers break under that strain. They cannot handle it. And I've seen mothers that they lose their vocation by being out in the workplace, which is very often working in the same conditions and strain as men around them who do not have the same disposition as a mother. When we are around such influences, we can lose we can begin to act as others, to imbibe that spirit, and that spirit in the workplace is often so contrary to the spirit of a mother. And so I've seen mothers lose that vocation. They no longer have an interest in their children. They find them just a burden that they can't wait to be rid of them. And this is what Pope Pius XII lamented. He said, if you have to work, necessity, you have to, but he said, it's something we should want to correct. And he said that he pleaded with mothers as far as possible to return to the home. And he also said when mothers do work out of the home, they ought to choose a profession that is at least in agreement with a woman's instincts and nature, not a profession that would destroy those instincts. That there are certain professions where a mother's nature can do some good in that profession, and there are others that would destroy the characteristic makeup of woman. He says, for example, in 1956, he said, with reference to work, the physical and moral makeup of woman calls for prudent discrimination as to its quantity and its quality. The idea of using women in construction work, in the mines, and for various types of heavy labor, which is praised and practiced in certain countries which claim to be progressive, is not a modern achievement at all. Instead, it is more like a sad return to an age that Christian civilization laid to rest long ago. There's always been, the Catholic Church has always taught, the woman has this great dignity, in imitation of our Blessed Mother, and that dignity is lost in attempting to become like a man, not equal in human dignity as we are, but an attempt of a woman to abandon the dignity which God has given her in order to imitate a man that God created differently. In 1933, Pope Pius XI, for example, there was a boxing match, a prize fight in Rome that many women attended. And a few days later, when Pope Pius XI, in the ceremonies for canonizing Louise Marillac, he used that opportunity to complain. He said, that's not the place for women at a boxing match. He said, that he contrasted the character of Louise de Marillac with her gentle character. He contrasted it with the tendencies among modern women to, quote, admire spectacles of brutal violence. And he said, at a boxing match, it's not possible to preserve the dignity and grace peculiar to woman. He also said, 2 years before that, in his encyclical Quadragesimo Annum, he said, mothers should carry on their work chiefly at home, or near to it, occupying themselves in caring for the household. A great disorder and one to be eliminated at all costs, is the abuse whereby mothers of families, because of the insufficiency of the father's wages, are forced to engage in gainful occupations outside the home, to the neglect of their own proper cares and duties, particularly the upbringing of their children. So I think we see clearly, hopefully, how great and how important it is to preserve this vocation of a mother, for all women to understand it. And as Pope Pius XII said, whether you get married and you become a mother in a physical sense or not, he said, you are all mothers. You become a nun, you are a spiritual mother. Even in the single life, a woman working, even in some career that is suitable to her dignity as a woman, she brings into that career and in how she lives her single life, she lives it as a mother. She brings into it the sensibilities of a mother. So let us pray for mothers and ask especially our Blessed Mother Mary to obtain for all mothers an appreciation of their vocation, and for all of us to honor especially our Blessed Mother today, thank her for being our spiritual mother, and thank our mother on this earth for all the care that she has given us, and if our mother is deceased, to remember to pray for her soul. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.